Some unfortunate preschool teacher, just after I'd started kindergarten, was allocating the percussion instruments. And I had my eye on a drum, and she said, no, the girls get the triangles and the tambourines, and the boys get the drums and the cymbals. I can still remember it quite distinctly, and decided at that stage I didn't know the word, but I was a feminist. I didn't want those crappy things that didn't make much noise. This probably makes me an inappropriate female, which is something that we actually have to deal with. Feminism. First of all, what is feminism? I agree it's really quite hard, but I would actually go a bit tighter than the last speaker. I mean, feminism is not about the status of women. It's not about women who want to be equal to men. We had a badge in the early days of feminism that said any woman that wanted to be equal to a man had a low level of ambition. And I think we need to revive it. Feminism in the 1970s, and I'm a 70s feminist, you can see by my grey hairs and etc., other daggy sort of whatever, we actually didn't call ourselves feminists. We called ourselves Women's Movement and Women's Liberation because we wanted to change the world. And somewhere along the line between then and now, that particular idea, along with a lot of other ideas of the 1970s and 60s and 70s, which was a huge era of change, disappeared. One of the things that we had in the 1960s and 70s was a very strong belief that we could change the world. We were optimists. We thought that actually the world at that stage, which was very conservative and boring, was something that needed change. And so issues around race, issues around sexual identity, issues around gender, all of those things were very much put on the agenda, and we got a lot of changes. In the 1970s, we moved a lot of things, they changed. We started the process of equal pay, we've got rather stuck on it since, but at least you can't work alongside somebody with the same job and be paid less. We did manage to free up issues around contraception and control of fertility because actually the pill had just arrived, and so there were various ways that we could do things about that. We got no fault divorce, we got lots of other things which were really significant. But we got anti-discrimination laws, sex discrimination laws, whatever they were, the whole of things of that. So you couldn't be refused a job as I was for being a girl. So people were under the illusion that therefore, we got equality. But something happened in the 1970s, which sort of really caught fire in the 80s and became very strong into the 90s and now, which was a paradigm change. Now, you're university students, you know what paradigm change. What was the big paradigm change that hit in the 80s? It's called neoliberalism, market forces. What I find really interesting is nobody actually knows that happened. You've just demonstrated it. Because once upon a time, when I was actually a student at this university, doing sociology, at that stage it was a very fashionable discipline and very radical, and lots of the changes that were coming out at that stage came out of the sociology department under Sol Enthal. We actually believed that the social sciences, of which economics is one, were contributors on the basis of probabilities of being able to make changes. If you could to get a probability better than by chance, you could actually find things that were capable of making changes. Somewhere along the late 70s, early 80s, we had a sort of international oil crisis, finances went international, the balance of industry and various things changed, and the nation state started losing ground as financial things became sort of freed from their national ties. And guess what? International finance wasn't really very enamoured with the idea of paying taxes or with the idea of expanding government and various other things. So you had an entire campaign that started in the late 70s, caught fire in the mid-80s, and still, unfortunately, has a great dominance despite the fact that GFC has proved that it doesn't actually work, which basically said market economics is the solution to all of these problems. We'll get away from all of that nasty welfare state stuff that happened after the Second World War, because before the Second World War we had a depression, and out of the depression came fascism and communism and various other extreme things, so we actually wanted to have a more civilised post-war state, and that sort of somehow or other started disappearing, because basically business didn't want to pay taxes, and the more you downgraded the idea of government, the more you actually didn't do it. Now, how does this relate to feminism? Well, one of the things that happened at that particular time was that economics, for some strange reason I haven't been able to fathom. How many of you study economics here? It's all right, it's not fatal, you can get over it. Neoliberal, neoclassical economics, which I refused my students to do. They could have told them they'd have to wash their mouth out with soap if they used the term economic rationalism, because there's nothing rational about it. Forms of belief, you can call it economic fundamentalism if you like. You know, similarly to various other forms of religious fundamentalism, there's a blind belief that the market will actually allocate resources appropriately with minimal interference by governments. This underpins things and has been used as an excuse for undermining the idea of collectivist provisions through the state, public health, public schooling, public everything else through that. Somewhere in the early 80s, it does come back to feminism, the disease arrived in Australia and was, I must say, caught up very comfortably by the Hawke-Keating government. Hawke-Keating was absolutely convinced, you know, the economy was fine, and because he had a tradie background, he thought if you finally got the levers into the correct position, everything would work out all right. You can find lots of speeches where he uses that metaphor. So they did make changes, and I'm not denying that some of the market changes that we were making were probably overdue. But they changed the paradigm, they changed the framework so that people actually stopped talking about what things should be part of community, society, relationships, all of those things, and what should be part of the market. But everything ended up under the market forces type things. All policies, social, economic, health, welfare, everything ended up with this economic push. Now, the basic character in economics is called is often referred to as economically rational man. I used to refer to him as Erg, and I set up a different sort of female version of that, which I called Eve, which was economically viable equity. I'm not even sure I want to use the term economics anymore on that one. Because the assumption behind most neoclassical economic equations is that human beings are rational individuals who are self-interested and make decisions in terms of their best outcomes. I hate to tell you this, but we're not rational. Most of you are probably fully aware that we make decisions. There's more and more stuff coming out pointing out we make completely irrational decisions most of the time and then find reasons to justify them. We're also not naturally self-interested. Even some of the sort of post-Darwinian stuff is now coming up with the fact that collaboration is much more important than actual competition. And so therefore that stuff doesn't work. So excuse the expression, the fuck thought that that idea was going to change the world. But it did, because powerful groups like News Limited and industry and various other things had a vested interest in trying to sort of push the market stuff because it gave them far more power than the government. And I was part of the problem in the sense that the women's movement, and this was actually pointed out recently by Michael Sandel when I asked him a question at the Writers' Festival, thought the way we could possibly move on from the equality we were beginning to gain by the end of the 70s and the early 80s when we got most of the legal changes into place was that we could sort of join in the economic debates and push women up so that we get more women on boards and more women into sort of positions of power, and then we could change the way things were done, and women would value, you know, the unpaid work and do various other things. We've used this economic model and we'd get equality for women. Well, we should have known better, because almost everything in the discipline of economics is gendered. It's macho, it makes assumptions about what's valuable, and what's valuable is that sort of public sphere of the market, war, trade, all of those sorts of things. What isn't important is care, relationships, emotions, feelings, community, altruism, etc., etc. All of those things that actually make life worthwhile, that we all depend on. Economics can't deal with it. Cause and tastes and externalities, I think, if I remember economics one, which I failed dismally many years ago. The economist there. So if economics can't deal with the social, it basically eliminates almost all of the stuff that was really important to women, because what we wanted to do and what we were trying to do, what the second wave women's movement wanted to do, was to shift things. So those areas which were the public policy areas and those areas which were the social policy areas were blended so that we actually put a similar value on being good at taking care of children as being good at rocket science. Because basically they're skills. So it's interesting, they always assume that being good with children is an attribute and not a learned skill. And those of us who are not so good with children will go know how to clean up houses and various other things. No, it's bloody well a skill. And that's why people can avoid it if they want to. So we actually have still got a huge gender bias in the system, which militates against not only the things that women see get still dumped on women, which is we still do most of the unpaid household work and child rearing and the various care of elders, etc., etc. If you take a look at things, it's one of the reasons why we haven't got an economic thing, because we have a superannuation system which actually doesn't cover that. But it actually means that almost all of the social relationship stuff, community stuff, family stuff, emotional stuff, cultural stuff, indigenous stuff, all of those things which are actually about our society, and the word society comes from the Latin socies, which is a tie, all of that stuff is completely off the political agenda. It's all about individual self-interest. So when the current government persecutes a whole lot of single parents, they claim to be doing it for their own good because they ought to go out and get a job. The fact is that when they actually knocked a whole lot of them off the payment, 60% of them were in jobs already, but they actually were running according to their prejudices, which is all single parents are sitting around having had 5 children by 8 different men in some peculiar way, and therefore not worth actually considering. So the gender bias is there. It's powerful. It goes into all of those sorts of areas, and it still manages to ignore the bulk of work that is done unpaid by men and women. And all of those things which, the last speaker was talking about, which are seen as sort of related to your body as being part of the power thing, tend to be much more macho individualism and are rewarded. So you're rewarded for being competitive, you're rewarded for coming to the top. Women who get onto boards are rewarded for the fact they're not going to make changes, and that's why I'm really cynical about getting more women onto boards or into power actually changing things. Because the evidence of having been around for a long time is the reason they get there is that they're not change agents, and the reason they can't change things is because they don't have the skills or the power, and anyhow they got there via the current system. So here we are, with serious problems in the world. As I say, the GFC proved that the market didn't work, and we've still got an enormous amount of struggling with certainly the uncontrolled market. I'm not against markets. But years ago, what called Klaus Hoffeg, who was a sociologist, had a very nice analysis who said you really need, there's 3 factors, 3 power bases in society. One is the community, which is where most of the women's stuff ends up as. One is the government, and one is the market. The community presents passion, relationships, society, culture, all of those less paid, less valued things. The market sells things, and the government should provide the legislation to make sure that everything competes appropriately. And my analysis of that was too much market gives you the mafia, and I think we've got some very good examples of that at the moment. Too much government gives you Stalinism, which we don't want, and too much community can give you things like some of the civil wars in Rwanda and Bosnia. So we don't want too much of any of them, we want a balance between them. But we don't have one. We have market dominance, and the women's movement is actually stuffed at the moment because it's sitting around with the rest of the left, and this is supposed to be a left thing, so I'm going to end up with the left stuff, which is most of the left are sitting around whinging. Every group I know, and I've been, and keep saying I've been marginal to more left and feminist groups than most people who I tend to move around with, are complaining about what is. Groups like Occupy and all of the other groups, they're sort of jumping up and down, even some of the new feminist groups and the misogyny thing, they're jumping up and down saying, ain't it awful? But I don't know who is producing alternatives. Who's offering the utopias? Who's offering the light on the hill? Who's offering the optimism? The left is sitting around whinging, and has been doing for at least the last 15 years, because when I wrote something recently on the death of Maggie Thatcher, I found a really nice quote of hers where she said, Tony Blair was one of the successors. Tony Blair followed a lot of the Keating stuff along there. He was a success because he didn't reverse any of the neoliberal stuff, he just made it a bit softer around the edges. Social democratic parties are stuffed because they actually haven't worked out how to deal with something which is not market forces. So I suppose what I'm saying is, I think it's time that women stopped waiting for men to fix the bloody place, that we started fixing it ourselves, that we used our understanding of where we come from and what's important to society and not to the economy, and started putting the social issues back on the political agenda, put social back into socialist, and put women behind, and a strong push behind it, so we actually value all of those things which really count in society, and then maybe we'll have a revolution. It's up to you lot, not me.